Go. I'll turn it over to Nick to get us started.
All right, just do a quick round of introductions. Nick Larson, Development Coordinator with the City of Winona.
Dave Pringle, rental property owner.
Chris Sanchez, real estate developer, property owner.
Amanda Hedlund, Habitat for Humanity. I'm Joby Rocky.
My name is Luke Sims. I'm the Assistant City Planner. And how about you introduce yourself, Deb?
Deb King.
And Rachel. Rachel, if you're talking, you are muted.
I should have probably said Deb King.
Yeah, sorry guys. Hi, Rachel Stahl. My kid's screaming, but Rachel Stahl, live well Winona in the hub.
Perfect. Well, we are going to go ahead and turn it over to Nick to get us going on some of the handouts that we had from the last meeting. We sent out a couple pieces of information to everybody here, mostly looking at key themes that have been going on as we've begun conversations over the last two meetings, and then also a look at what is affordable for housing in our community. And I believe that Nick has some of that able to pull up and talk through it.
Yep. So overall, we'll go through these incomes and rents, and then we'll start grabbing some, I guess, overall review our thoughts and comments from the previous two meetings and additional ones to start putting together our own goals and objectives for the 2022 comprehensive plan. With the comp plan, and I'm sure at your guys' subcommittee orientation meetings, I just wanted to point out the themes for the plan: equity, technology, and sustainability. Is that we are supposed to be making sure that we incorporate all three items into our goals and objectives. First item that we'll touch on here is last week, or our last meeting, we had questions about rents, incomes. So I went through and I pulled together a bunch of census data that we have here. So within this spreadsheet, and there's a one pager that was provided, I believe was emailed out to everyone. This is where that information comes from. So I'll just try to hit on where this information is. And we're looking at percent of owner occupied homes and renters. Or in this column, this will note that 0.6% of owner occupied housing units earn less than $5,000. So just if you want to take a deep dive in the weeds, this is where this information comes from. Part of our conversation in our last meeting was causing house burden individuals or households. And that's defined as folks making or spending 30% or more of their gross income on housing. So if we look at this here, we're looking at individuals or households earning $20,000 or less. And for owner occupied households, 4.5%, renters, 12.7%. The next income bracket that we'll be looking at would be 20,000 to 35,000, and respectively 4.5, 12.4, and again on the next one, 35 to 50,000, 2.7 for owner occupied households and 2.4. So when we start looking at all this information, I believe it's outlined within the Word document that was provided. It does summarize total of how many renter households, how many owner occupied are spending 30% or more. When we start looking at then also what individuals earn in respect to 30% or more. Again, this is all census data that within the city of Winona, there are 19% of our owner occupied households spend between $300 and $499, and 19.1% of renters. So that'd be accumulate with the 30% rule of making $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, $5.77. When we start looking at some of our comparable rents or what's really out there of $800 per month to $999, and for mortgage, 13.3% of people in Winona spend $800 to $999 on their mortgage, and then 14.6% for renters. It means an individual or household have to earn $2,666, $32,000 annually, or $15,000, and then $15.38 per hour, which is actually a couple dollars less per hour than our average hourly rate per census data. So when we start getting into those that are cost burden, when we start looking at this is all interpretive, you start looking at what the rents or mortgages are. And spending $1,000 a month for a mortgage and on a rent, that's a fairly decent place. And you start looking at some of our older homes where one has a mortgage that they would have bought 10 years ago for $130,000. You're spending about $1,000 a month for your 30-year note. So just to kind of put that in line with what is on the market, what our employers are paying people in Winona. That just gives us a snapshot right there of what people are earning and paying. Any questions on any of that spreadsheet, fund information?
You're saying our average hourly wage is about 18, 19 bucks or something?
The last data I saw that we were right around $18 an
That's
hour.
pretty good.
Yeah.
No.
So that's your average full-time equivalent or hourly rate of making 18. So if you're a full-timer, right around 36 grand a year. And then if we use that 30% rule, then there's quite a bit of our housing, especially when you start looking at our rental, which seems to be the largest housing need and more cost effective to develop. That a lot of our rental in town is affordable. So that's when we start looking at who is it not affordable to and what are our housing needs? Is it a specific income bracket? Or as the comp plan, are we looking at incentives or mechanisms either between city incentives, zoning, of how do we put the tools out there to make more housing attainable to all income levels? It could be the individuals that are on a fixed income, which Rachel mentioned in our last meeting, and that definitely should be an objective, but do we stay that narrowed or do we make it bigger where the doctors and the executives of all of our large companies are they able to find a house here in Winona, or are they living down in Holman where they're building townhouses and larger houses all over the place? So it's just a couple of thoughts tonight, I guess challenges for us to think about.
I wanted to thank you for the data because this was really informative and I enjoyed looking at all of the stories that it has to tell.
It does, and I mean, if you can, and it's data, so we can, when you look at it, you can manipulate and make your own story with it, but if we look at everything encompassing, I mean, especially when I'll pull this up here if I can find it, our census data.
Mhm.
So I just want to point out here, when we look at it of, we're gonna have to put it at. Yeah, this bottom line here. So overall, when we evaluate cost burden households, approximately 62% of all of our homeowners and renters spend 30% or more. But when we start looking at those income brackets, a lot of those were 2.4% of households, either owner occupied or renters, are spending 30% or more. You know, they all add up, but the larger numbers were individuals that most likely on fixed incomes earning 20% or $20,000 or less, especially on the renters. It was like 30% of those that are spending more than 30% of their income. So, I mean, that could definitely be a focus area right there. So, the other thing to take into account with this, especially when we're looking at households that are earning $20,000 or less, or overall households spending 30% of their earned income, is that this is census data. If our student population takes the census and they answer the census that their residency is in the city of Winona, that's part of that data that's collected. And as being a former person in college, there's no way that I made $20,000 a year. So, I mean, that's also another aspect to take into account. Some of the other questions that we have answers to from our previous is the vacancy rate of mainly the rental market. So for market rate rentals, we are at a 1% vacancy rate. Stabilized market should be at 5%. When we start speaking about shallow subsidized or deep subsidized, those would be housing types such as HRA operated housing units, or even the new one going up on Mankato Avenue, where there's income restrictions and rent restrictions. So very low on vacancy rate equates out that there's a high need for those types of housing units. There were some questions about senior rental. This information was taken from the housing study that for market rate rentals, 3.4% was the vacancy rate. That could be market rate rentals. Bluffview Estates on Mankato Avenue, right across the number one, right across from the hospital. So that's that type of housing type. Assisted living units. We use also right by Walgreens, the assisted living property right there. Then our housing study broke senior housing down into another group with also shallow and deep subsidized, which had a vacancy rate of 3.2%. The only deep and shallow subsidized senior rental housing units that we have in Winona are Valley View Tower and the Schaffner homes. Those are the ones that are strictly senior subsidized. There was a question about median income. There's so many different definitions out there. And the one that is normally used is this highlighted one right here, household income. That could be one person. That could be a single father with a child. That could be two siblings, adult siblings living with each other. It's any combination you can think of. Could be spouses. And right here in Winona, for a little snapshot, we have 11,502 housing units, 10,521 are occupied, just under 1,000 are vacant. That's telling us that overall, for owner-occupied units in Winona, 64.1% of the units, 0.6 are vacant. And then there are about 40% of rentals in per the census data, 0.5% are vacant. When it comes to households that are cost burden, 28% of homeowners, 47% of renters. And then the median household cost with a mortgage is $1,135. So that's just above the previous slide with all the incomes of $32,000 a year. We start talking about our average hourly rate. That mortgage is affordable for our average hourly rate of around $18 an hour, and definitely affordable for the average rents at right around $650 a month.
So what are the 1,000 units that are vacant?
Can't break that one down. Can't tell you where they're at.
That's the census data.
Just off census. Could be that they got to a house and somebody's moving and selling. It could be as simple as that transaction. There's nobody home. It could be somebody that, I mean, a rental that a place is not rented. Somebody's on vacation, nobody answers the door. Doesn't fill out even one of the 18 mailers that get sent to the house. That's how that number comes from. So I mean, there's definitely a percentage of error within that number. So
And does anybody know, is that a common percent
overall, like
overall with the census?
I could not tell you. I haven't looked in other communities to be able to determine that. It seems awfully high, but even when I just look at tax forfeited properties or properties that are going through the tax forfeited process within the city of Winona, there's got to be roughly about 20 of those homes right there. And then if we start looking at rental properties, that if when this census data was taken, that was April of that year at the height of COVID, a lot of university student population probably moved back home to mom and dad. So their units were unoccupied, which also reflects the census data that we've received, that our numbers are much lower than what we projected. So
This is 5-year estimate. That those numbers are for the 2020 survey, and it's what's going to be estimated.
Right, so they
currently and going forward.
yeah, so they use that as the baseline and then start pulling it forward on the trend. They're also, I mean, that's part of the baseline. Then they're back looking at 2010 and what that was and what trends are all the way through on the methodology. So
And then the numbers for the housing study are 5 to 6 years old now.
yes, and then probably the data that was used for that was probably also a couple of years old prior to that published date. So that's why I was trying to pull some of our historical data from the housing study and then the newer stuff from our 2020 census data, just to see what those differentials were. And if anything, it's shown us that our vacancy rate, especially on rentals, has gone down relative to 2016, which they were probably, I mean, in 2016, when they're the vacancy rate, they were interviewing apartment complexes that would have 16 or more units. Is I believe is the threshold that they were using on that. So they were looking, not necessarily looking at, the 1 and 2 bedroom houses on the east side of town that are rentals. But the larger, if you will, your standard apartment buildings rather than just rental units.
So the 15 buildings. The whole one.
Yeah, that was their sample size. Yep. Most definitely. And this is just a kind of a breakdown, and I only looked at renters, just because I had the feeling from our last meeting that seemed to be the housing. I guess the housing choice is the easiest, the most cost effective to build, and overall, we all know that we need more housing choices. So I specifically looked at this and what type of rents are affordable or what people are paying right now. So just over 1,000 renters paying 500 or less, 2,200, 500 to 1,000, 440, 1,000 to 1,500. And then right around 60 paying 1,500 to 2,000. As said, I mean, this is data you can interpret all you want to, because the other part of the spreadsheet that we already looked at and was emailed out, they note that there are 0 rental units in Winona that are charging $2,000 or more. Now there's a couple of units just a block away from here, so that's the best data we have for that. So with that, any questions about incomes, wages, vacancy rates?
Stories that you saw from spreadsheets.
So with this data, the occupancy rate being so low for rentals, I mean, 5%, it sounds like we're matched one-on-one for rentals. One-on-one rentals per people that want a rental, pretty much. So we're at perfect harmony with how many people we have and how much the base rate is 0.5%. So in this committee, what are we gonna more focus on? The needs of a student population, or the needs of renters, or the needs of, which one are we gonna really mainly focus, or all of them?
All, I would say.
Together.
Yeah, all. And with the harmony side of things, I mean, it's at 0.5%, but for a healthy market for rentals, it should be right around 5% vacancy rate.
Healthy for.
People
bank
like
use-
the housing studies say 5%.
Yeah, well, the banks use that number for vacancy rate on.
Also, like, what's the need in the community?
Yeah, well, they use that for a number, so that if you less than that for a good, it's helping them, but
I think
it's
there's-
chugging, it's cash flowing.
There's an assumption that, some rentals will be taken off market for upgrades. There's an assumption that some will be taken over for changeover of tenants. There's an assumption that there will be some that are going to be built, right? Or assumptions for fluctuations in demand across the given market. I agree. I don't know exactly where Maxfield Research grabbed 5% of that healthy number, but I think that we probably agree, and that was the conclusion of Maxfield Research, was 0.5% is not necessarily a healthy
Because
number.
then there's no options, and then
Right.
you have more, then I'll drive it up and one.
Right.
And then nobody can move to town. Then you don't have.
Or
any
change their
opportunity for population. Yeah.
And I think that's a good point as well, is what's the demand across Winona? And I think that we've seen with new housing developments that they do fill up fairly quickly. There is still demand for housing across the board. I would say.
Well, I bet today I got at least 5 phone calls on it. So yeah, every day I get phone calls. So, I mean, I know that there's demand for more than what we
And are you fully rented right now, Jay? Okay, and Chris?
Yeah, it's really, right now, it's everybody's coming back from COVID, it's coming back strong because of that, but who knows now? It's year to year. I do know there's demand for nice rentals, and that's the thing, we have enough rentals, or are we trying to upgrade them? And in looking at that, I think that's the main, what we really look at is upgrading what we have in our current stock, in my opinion. Probably make it more viable and economical for everybody.
It's hard,
Right.
just the cost of putting up new and then. I don't know, how you can keep from having a greater divide on new and for cost.
Those are part of the things where, in our last couple of meetings, I mean, people have thrown out ideas like with city initiatives. You know, that's something we put as an objective for folks. So what we're kind of hoping to do from all the thoughts and ideas that have already been put out, maybe expand on those that for our next meeting, what I'd maybe like to do is from ideas from that are in the notes for this meeting and the previous meeting. And then we'll go through a couple of the items within the 07 comp plan that we missed. But I'll start putting together the subcommittee's thoughts of goals and objectives in a format, whatever we can capture. And if it's high-end housing, housing for fixed incomes, supportive housing, homelessness, I'll start categorizing that in and we'll start putting in a working format. We'll send it out to the group, and then individually, the subcommittee members start plugging in additional ideas and or thoughts that I either missed or that are new. Is hopefully kind of the direction we'll be able to take to put everybody's ideas and feelings and thoughts into a document.
Are there, you know, you say new, is there anything new happening out in the world that you're familiar with that is creating some less expensive housing? Because even the water's edge or whatever it's called, you know, that's crazy. It could be crazy expensive when it's a Mankato Avenue, you know, the cost to build it is.
The cost to build is very expensive. Yeah, most definitely it is. Yeah, but there's other things that I'm not gonna say are new ideas, but they'd be new to Winona, such as land trust potentially, where, yep, so the land is actually leased for 1 year for $99. So you're taking that land cost out to the homeowner that lives there. Utilizing tax incentives for housing. I mean, TIF has been used before, mainly for industry and manufacturing. Council did approve that they would go into a housing TIF with a proposed project on 51 Riverview. But it doesn't happen in Winona. I mean, it's a statutory rule. We can use it. It's a tool that's out there. It's not new, but it would be new to us to be able to utilize it.
But that was that tied to being low income housing to make it a tip? Is that correct?
Yeah, a special kind of type of housing tip.
You know, because honestly, what it costs, if they gave you the subsidies that they give the people on Mankato Avenue just to build it, he could build it cheaper and rent it cheaper than what they're doing. It's just insane to me.
Yep, and that'd be, let's take the state out of it, because it's all the state for low income housing tax credits that there's so many added layers of cost of lawyers and all their different rules. That does add to the per unit cost relative to you or Chris building something locally. I know what those unit costs are between Chris's most recent product and what that is out there. It's a significant difference. But be able to utilize the tools of TIP, because there's other tips that can be used to make housing where there's not all those rules. But you bring up a good point where you can make more affordable rents. And that's part of the conversation the developer can have with the city of, I can build this and I'm going to charge this for rents. If you were to back me up with 200,000 in tax abatement for 10 years, I could charge these lower rents and I'll sign a contract with the city and submit my rent rolls and everything else that I am charging this for 20 years. I'll maintain the supportability level. That's the mechanism that it can work.
That's one of the reasons why a lot of guys don't build bigger apartment buildings, and you got out of state, that's a big corporation. It's a big corporation building that does that, and they strictly do that, you know, and they make the money off depreciation the back end, but local developers don't want to deal with that stuff because they don't have lawyers and all these people doing all the I dotting and T crossing, and so it costs so much more money to do the paperwork to get all that stuff. So it's like, you know, I can just do it cheaper by, you know, being frugal, you know, and be responsible. It's hard to get people on board that are local.
Is there a medium you know, between doing this huge project, that obviously has a lot of costs incurred, and like you're saying, there's other things that like a small developer just doesn't have.
It's not that,
Too.
it's the paperwork involved, and then you gotta use state rules and regulations for cost and all kinds of stuff, so the bureaucracy is the cost, not the building.
To be able to tap into
Yeah.
tax
Yeah,
credits.
so the
So tax
bureaucracy.
So it
credits.
doesn't have to be a large enough building to be eligible for TIF.
For TIF, for the eligibility, it needs to meet by statute what's called the but-for test. So we look at the performance.
I gotta go.
Yep, enjoy your next one, Chris.
You know, I was gonna say too, with all that stuff, and I've been thinking this, you know, when I was selling real estate. We were always trying to find first time home buyers, you know, which is affordable, right? How do we do that? We'd always say, let's go find newer places to sell. Cause if you sold people newer houses, new developments or new stuff, it would go like this and it would free up the bottom.
Mhm.
And so by default, making new stuff would bring in affordability by default. And so that's something that I would be thinking about. So,
Yeah.
sorry, I gotta run.
Yep, thank you.
Just to add to that, while Chris is leaving, sorry, I'm jumping
Yep.
before your tip element, but naturally occurring affordable housing was one of the key elements identified in the previous housing study as well. And when you do have a healthy housing market, you do allow those properties to cycle a little bit, or you allow the market segments to cycle so that somebody who's graduating from a college rental property has the ability to move up to that next first-time home buyer or through a more expensive, you know, professional type housing. And we don't really have some of those next step locations or types of housing options, which is of course why this is an all of the above situation. A healthy market is able to supply those because the Dave Pringles of the world see that there's a market and they're able to come in and build it and actually provide it. Because there is going to be demand for them. So to that end, there is definitely that as well. Sorry, I'll let you jump back into tip.
TIP doesn't have to be a large project. It's beneficial because how TIP works is, say you have a parcel, we have our parcel land, and right now that pays $1,000 a year in taxes. And if you do a small project that only adds $1,000 in taxes, it's only that 1,000 that's being rebated back to the developer. Now, if you do a large project and go from 1,000 up to 20,000, then it's that 19,000 that gets rebated back. So it's all on scale. It also matters what the financial gap is to get that project going, along with what is the community benefit. So, you know, as Dave brought up, maybe Chris could build the same product and charge $1,000 a month, but if he had a little incentive on the backside, he could make that $750 a month. Well, if that's serving a community need, that's something that us as a subcommittee, an overall idea like that is we make that part of our objectives, like where we can use financial incentives such as tax abatement, TIF, to be able to incentivize, to create affordable housing that the community needs at the time. However we want to wordsmith that, or even if it's not the word affordable, it's attainable. Create attainable housing or an income level that the community needs. So, I mean, it's along those types of 30,000 feet things we can look at. I mean, diving in the weeds, that's where we come up with those ideas. So, and I think that's kind of where we've been going through, where I just want to kind of with those ideas. So last time Lucy brought out goal number 1 of the 07, preservation of housing. Amanda right out of the gates. The city's going to enforce something, we better have a financial incentive to be able to help those homeowners out, and or if it becomes to landlords. My recommendation as staff is that as a subcommittee, we would make that part of the goal and or objective. And I just, from that, I kind of want to go through our notes, and as the subcommittee, please let me know if staff's interpreting your guys' thoughts and ideas correctly, if we should be adding something to it, language, removing it, or hey, that was just a discussion point that doesn't need to be part of anything. So is that all right with everybody? So I'm guessing city incentive for preservation, keep that part of it. One of the other ones that was brought up that was completely missing from the 07. This is our conversation right here with Crystal. Dave asked a question to Rachel, is that we should be adding language about underserved populations, most notably transitional housing supportive, and the homeless population. Is that something the group would like to have within the 2022 comp plan?
I think it's a lot of things.
And kind of follow up on your question from last time, Dave, Rachel, right before the meeting, she sent out some data they have at the hub, and they have a housing pathway of people that are housing insecure. So Rachel, interject if I'm misinterpreting your email, but a total of 40 pathways were created. 13 individuals or households were successfully put in secure housing. On average, it took 74 days to find that housing. And by definition, secure is when they're actually maintaining that housing for 30 days or more. So overall, I mean, 74 days just to find a place, that's a long time, I guess. So you want to add anything to that, Rachel?
No, that's, you did perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
Into that, I think also make it easy for it would be good for the city to make it easy for organizations to create transitional and temporary housing. A few years ago, there was a ordinance voted in by the city council that required I believe it was a public comments period to have a new housing of that sort built or move into a neighborhood, something along those lines, which of course adds a layer of complexity for any organization trying to do that.
It also opens the door for people to say, no, the whole not in my backyard thing. Like I support you conceptually, but I don't want it here. And I think that there are, various group homes sprinkled throughout the house or the neighborhood for HCO and Hiawatha Valley. And they don't seem to be epicenters of complaint, but people always have the fear that they would be. So when you invite, not that I object to public comment theoretically, but when you specifically open it up and require that, it can prevent a project like that from taking hold.
Yeah, yes, along those lines, I'm also not object to public comment in general, but when it singles out a specific circumstance, then it becomes arbitrary. And there's no public comment if someone wants to develop student housing, turn house into student housing, or some other sort of rental in the block if it doesn't violate the 30% rule. So I think
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. One of the things kind of in line with the hub in providing that data, I was thinking that potentially that we put an objective of to utilize our local resources to investigate, analyze housing needs, to be able to let the community know what we need, and then from there, try to solve that issue. Forming language along those lines to have in the comp plan where we're kind of open and make it fluid, where if the hub can come forward and say, we have 40 pathways in the last 18 months, well, that's quite a few people right there. What can we do as a community to be able to serve that population? Same could hold true for an institution, say Winona State. We've been trying to hire professors for the last 2 years and cannot get our first selection because they can't find a place to live. What type of housing choice meets that professional or that household? So we could use it. It goes in multiple directions, not just underserved, but also, if you will, the higher earners of the community.
Della used to really wave that flag. All of the executives trying to move to town who just couldn't. And we really would like to have them live here. So I don't want to focus on affordable housing at the expense of overall choice.
Okay. And so with that, maybe some of the key buzzwords that we can think about and don't have to decide right now is, is it housing choice, and where do we want to insert that in the comp plan? Is it housing attainable for all incomes in substitution of affordable housing all the time?
That's really smart and balance.
Okay, so we'll make Luke's, I see right, Luke's got that in notes.
It's recorded too.
Fancy.
So in terms of preservation of housing, any other additional thoughts? comments?
I think it'd be cool to have a public awareness campaign. Because sometimes people who are struggling with crumbling homes are dealing with humiliation and fear. And a lot of people are afraid of having their homes taken away, especially if they have health conditions. A lot of people are, they have just developed practices of hiding. And so it can be very challenging to reach, inform, and assist people who have developed this sort of self-protection. So I don't know how we could be more vocal and out there about options like this, but I can tell you from experience, that's a hard to reach community, and it is hard to develop trust. Because you're looking at a lot of seniors there who have paid off their house, had a few significant things go wrong, and now are just kind of holding on by their fingernails, and they're so afraid of somebody taking that house away. So they're really hard to reach. And if we are investing in home preservation for vulnerable populations, there's a trust and an access issue there related to, I don't know, answer to that. Continue to grapple with it, but something I think.
Yep, I think I understand the theme that you're throwing out there. Looking at the 07 comp plan, there was an area of an objective where they speak about block club or adopt the block program, that maybe there's some way to interweave education along with maybe identifying these homes that need a little bit of love. And we might be able to interweave that if we want to go along that line as an objective. We can potentially stick it in the area of preservation, or prior to it was in maintain and enhance liability.
Did that ever take off?
With adopt a block, it was like a neighborhood watch. I know on the east end where I live over there, a couple of years ago, speaking with Bridget with the police department, she had come across an old adopt a block file in the police department where I believe it was attempted, probably back in, she was saying in the 2000s at some point, because that was something that her and I, as at the Blandon Foundation, were looking at how could we, I guess, get that back up and going.
Yeah.
And it just never came to fruition. But that's something that was in the 07 for adopt a block, and we can weave this education, identifying component into it if we would like to maintain that language, definitely update it, but maintain that thought and theme.
And there are a few other actually town and down communities that do have like neighborhood advocate programs, and they do primarily focus on student renters and student housing. But we could do a similar program. We could find a partnership to do a similar program where, hey, listen, we noticed that you haven't been trimming those bushes in the last 25 years. Can we connect you with a resource? And they, at least in another community that I worked in, they had the ability to connect you with legal resources, connect you with incentive resources, connect you with people who can just talk you through procedure. So the ability to just have people out and about in the community, quite literally wearing a shirt, asking how I can improve my house or what have you, does actually yield some results as well.
Yeah. That could be a great job for some AmeriCorps. I should hire someone for
The
that.
city could also invest in the existing senior center and staff to, there's already an existing program.
Like snow angels.
The city could invest and expand the staff at the senior center to have some that, someone's dedicated staff for those issues. So that disseminate that, information that's available to the city. To the seniors.
Along with other community resources. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you. Yes.
Hi, this is Deb King. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you real well, but I wanted to make some comments about, from what I heard where you were talking about with senior citizens and their homes and their health starts going and their homes start going. I've worked with as a home health aide in the community. I also went through an experience with my mother and my brother who lives in another city. And with this, just when I go into some of the homes that there's hoarding issues and I'm not sure if it's always been there, but it is. And I was trying to find resources of within the community on how we can get that addressed. A couple of times I did I'll help you get this all cleaned up and whatever. I got it all together, and really what I learned from my family experience is that if you don't address the behavior through a mental health perspective, it's all for naught. And I think of this one gal who was telling me who had problems with hoarding, that it was her church that had come and helped her get all her stuff organized for this supposed move that was supposed to go on. And anyway, long story short, they had filled 2 dumpsters, and the church, without knowing, did not have them get removed right away. Well, shortly afterwards, this woman had most of it put back in her home. And needless to say, that's why our church community gets frustrated in circumstances like that, because they paid lots of money for not getting what they had expected. And in my own family case, again, having no idea, my single younger brother had stayed with my mom while she was having health issues. She ended up having to go into assisted living, and he stayed in the home. It was a bad choice on our part to have him do that. He did not manage that well, and my mother's home just became a wreck, and he wouldn't answer mail or anything. In fact, the mailman stopped and said, "Is there anybody living there anymore? Because this mail never gets picked up." Anyway, he just basically had a mental breakdown from this. And I tried to work with St. Cloud to try to get some help and assistance. And again, what comes from that is only people that are willing to take the help. I got it started through their social service program, but none of us in the family live up in that area. So for us to see him continue to get the help, it kind of failed. And anyway, I always wanted to know where, because I've seen our community, the hoarding that goes on, and how do we get kind of a comprehensive plan that we're not just trying to do the cleanup. I've done that and I broke my back trying to do it. But that doesn't solve it. So anyway, that's where my rant comes, as part of us looking at people to maintain their homes might be we need more resources, and then instead of just focusing on the home itself.
Yes.
Sorry if that doesn't make any sense.
Nope, it sure does. Thank you very much, Deb. Perfect. In our last meeting, the next point that was brought up was balanced housing supply, and I had a couple of notes from a couple of people about the language of the baby boom population, and if that should remain as language used, or to strike that for the new comprehensive plan. Whereas the last comprehensive plan, it noted, assess the future needs for housing in Winona, including the large baby boom population segment.
How large is the baby boom population now? Compared to when this was done?
Well, it's a large part of our population, but for the housing side of things, there's been a lot of housing that has been developed and geared towards that specific age demographic. Whereas this is something that, as a group, we can look at, do we want to be that narrowed of
I don't think you'd look at
everything? Okay, and that's where staff's looking for just direction on that. Of if anybody has language they would like to insert or any ideas, or we can draft something up when we start putting everything into a format. And then from there as a group, we can look at that. But just overall, then we'll try to be, I guess, a little more inclusive with that language of housing needs rather than strictly a certain age demographic.
There's an interesting bubble there, because there's a lot of demand for senior housing now, but as they age beyond housing, then there will be an overabundance. So buildings that are too rigidly locked into senior housing will find probably a vacancy problem after that population
Yeah.
level wanes.
And that was brought up about the age restricted, Chris brought up in their last meeting about covenants. I looked into it with statute. It all matters of how the covenants and when they were set up, of when they no longer exist or are enforceable. When it comes to that, so there, it all matters on all the legal paperwork and when that corporation or LLC put said restrictions on the use of the building. So, but to continue on with housing balance, Lucy brought up, for us to maybe think a little outside the box about how do we create our housing balance, and this potentially goes into a little bit of land use. Where she brought up some industrial land, and we spoke about that last time, but behind Menards, those lots been sitting there for decades. Is that something as a subcommittee that we just at least throw it out there and have language within the comp plan to give it some legs if anybody ever wants to develop that land into a residential use of looking at industrial manufacturing land for potential residential uses in the future if needed as a community need, something along those lines.
Welcome discussion on alternate use for zoning categories.
Yeah. And to that extent, not even just zoning categories, but I completely agree, also alternate uses for zoning categories. For example, you can't put residential uses in an industrial zoning district in Winona. As we've seen across other communities, things like warehouse districts in Minneapolis have been phenomenal for revitalization, and there's a huge market for that type of industrial chic living arrangement. But then additionally, the land use committee had a really good, robust conversation about even utilizing things like how are our park resources like Westfield Golf Course going to look in the future? Or how are our parking lots going to look? We require 2 automobile spaces for every housing unit, which is 558 square feet with a drive aisle. So that's a whole apartment or stack of apartments that we could be considering. So, and I think that our transformative projects subcommittee has felt very strongly that the phase 1 engagement returned a huge desire for housing and the need for housing choice in our community. And that we should really be prioritizing it. I like some of the language that I believe, Amanda, you were saying earlier, that we shouldn't be just sacrificing housing choice for one housing segment. And I think what I'm hearing from land use, transformative projects, and even from this group is we shouldn't be sacrificing, other goals necessary, or we should be focusing on housing choice and housing achievement and being willing to think flexibly around that. So to next point, underutilized land is really something that we do need to look at. There's only so much land in Winona, whether it is industrial or parkland or currently just land that could be housing, but isn't currently housing.
And for example, just for a visual for everybody, so this is out on Homer Road directly across from the middle school.
I know exactly where that is.
So that's
Supposed to be a park.
Well, kind of.
On our city roster, it's called a park.
Kinda.
It's just green.
So this was it is tax forfeit land that was dedicated to the city for park use. It's never been used as a park. They just go up there and mow the grass. This has a covenant on it that ends in 2028. So I'm just using this as an example of how as a group, maybe we create language that the city needs to look outside the box and what our current land inventory is and what could be utilized. So, I mean, there's potential of golf course that probably is not profitable like a lot of golf courses throughout the nation. There's potential land such as this parcel. There's something that the city habitat and county has done before of utilizing tax forfeited properties to be able to create housing choices. In that case, with the habitat model, that becomes naturally affordable, or it is just because of their model. So I just bring this up for us to kind of look at of if we need more housing, where are we going to put it? And what can we suggest in our comp plan to make it happen. I feel this is very important. One of the reasons just for the group is that, you know, up on Gargan Height, there were 76 lots to be able to build single family homes up there. Great, we need it. And there's a bunch of bedrock and you can't run utilities. So there's land, but it's not economically usable. So, I mean, we gotta be creative all across the board. It's great that we have it up there. Maybe we'll figure something out to be able to utilize those 76 lots. But what else are we able to do? What other ideas can we generate? And just having this language, if we want to, of looking at available green space, tax forfeited properties, anything else, parking lots that we can think of, just having that language within the comp plan gives us a lot of flexibility and power in the future to be able to at least have the potential for those developments. As an example, well, I'll bring up Water's Edge on Mankato Avenue. Back in the 07 comp plan, the future land use that was marked as to be rezoned for R3, so high density residential. So before this project came forward, that was zoned as a business district. So that allowed the flexibility to actually get those apartments constructed on Mankato Avenue. So,
I mean, I'd be curious, and I don't know how this could be wordsmithed, but like you talked about those lots by Menards. It would be interesting to create some requirements like first floor retail into some, up an area like that.
Yep.
And so I don't know, again, I don't know how that would get wordsmithed into this, as like a guidepost, right?
yeah, but no, we can work on that where it would be something mixed use. It would have to be a mixed use type of development within those areas. And besides mixed use as the group, we can note the need of mixed use and mixed income, which I want to hit on equity, where in the last meeting, when we talked about these manufacturers or industrial zones and potential housing uses, to confirm that this language, or at least along these lines, should be included in the comp plan, that we make sure that if we're reusing industrial land, it's not strictly for affordable housing, but mixed income to not further segregate lower income households. Is that, and
When people hear mixed income, I think they a lot of times jump to this worry that they're gonna have a problem neighbor. But a lot of teachers make $35,000 a year. So mixed income should really be celebrated as a way to have the teachers and the kids that go to school and the people that own the neighborhood business and the people who work as vice presidents for a local manufacturer all together. And that, you know, in a mixed income community, really everybody has the chance to succeed and change. And it's not always just about inviting a problem population into an otherwise stable environment. It's about recognizing that police officers, especially when they're getting started, have lower income. And that single head of household families, even in a professional role, might be considered low income because of the number of children in the house, not because of the job that they have. So that when we're talking about mixed income, I think we should have a broader understanding, you know, that we're not creating extremely low income subsidized housing right next to an elegant high rise. But it's, you know, a cross section of the community that is already naturally occurring if people were to sit and look at it. If you went to a city block of owner occupied housing in Monona and mapped it out, you probably already find a lot of mixed income in the older neighborhoods. So it's not a new and a scary thing. It's just that the phrasing around it can be unsettling for people who think that their neighborhood character will be diminished.
Right. Which I'll look into it on just buzzwords of maybe there's something different besides mixed income to be able to get rid of that stigma, just like subsidized housing or affordable housing, that
Yeah.
find something a little
I thought
gentler.
attainable word was really a great move in that direction.
We'll try to blend that in with that. For the sake of everybody's time, I just want to hit on a couple more notes and get thoughts, and then be able to. Yeah.
I think a good thing would be how can the city practically achieve these, how can city staff practically achieve these goals? Such as this lot, because currently, who knows that this lot, the details about, as an example of this lot, the details of this lot, and how is that, if that information getting to developers or contractors who may be interested? So how can the city get that information out there?
Mhm.
Through the creation of a, repurposing a current position or creating a new position to do that, to point on that. Secondly, the role of covenants play in development, hindering development or assisting development, but also do that.
So this, like this, is hindered from anything happening for another 6 years, is that correct?
So that's a plot of land that may have been developed, but a covenant has. For all effects and purposes, prevented that.
And how large is it?
2 acres.
Oh.
2
How large
acres.
is it? 2 acres?
Yeah, then right back here, this is one of the things also when you get in the political game of taking away green space in City Park, well, there's another one right there. So,
And is that utilized?
there's equipment on there. What this was, I don't know if it was planted with the apartment complex out here or not, but yeah, it is, it's maintained and there's equipment, playground equipment out there, so it is utilized by the residents out in this area. This one, though, I don't believe this, no, there's nothing, it's just an open grass field, needs to be, maybe some of the tenants.
How did that end up being in covenant as a part?
So how that works with tax forfeited properties is that when a taxing jurisdiction has the ability to possess it, if you will, from the state, the county, there's certain uses that we can get it for nothing, or at least back in this state, maybe $1 was just donated. No, this was just it was from the state. But if it's used for park, that's one of them. If we need it for infrastructure, or if it's for affordable housing, is how I believe the 3 uses right now of how it can be used. And with housing, it's like this is being tax forfeited, the port, habitat, and the county. We worked through the process with the port, acquired 2 lots that were tax forfeited for the county, and then the port then deeded those the habitat to construct single family homes. But on this one, I mean, how Joseph was going with that, once those, as we would approach, I would think within a 24-month period of those covenants being gone is when we would start marketing that area over there.
So right now, within the constructs of the current covenant, Habitat could go in and build affordable housing there?
On this particular one, not at
Yeah.
this point in time.
Okay, you're
Not
just saying
until-
how
not-
they obtained it.
Right, so like
Okay.
on the other tax forfeited properties, there used to be homes or were homes on them. And that's how we just kept housing there. With this one, this was dedicated to the city to be used for park land for a term of 30 years.
Okay.
And that comes up in 2028.
What time mowing grass?
So, I just want, so with this in existing lands, one of the comments that was made last week from Amanda was to be sure that we're developing housing on existing land within the city. I would think we, as a group, we'd want that in there, but I would like to expand on it. Very similar to language that we used in the housing task force of, besides land that's available within the city limits, that we also evaluate our housing needs and land that potentially could be annexed for housing in the future. So,
That's really the only way you're gonna have achieved growth, but basically the only way.
so I really think that
Important.
it's very important language, I think, and a mechanism that we'd have to utilize.
What are you proposing? I'm sorry about that.
For annexation, that besides just looking in the city for infill development and using existing land that they meet our housing needs, that we'd also have to look at when it's appropriate to potentially annex land into the city. So. Fine example, or most recent example of that would be right on County Road 17, directly across the street, or the county highway from Signatures and Bridges. Is there 6 acres of land that was annexed in the city. 3 of those acres were designated to build a 27 unit senior co-op housing that unfortunately in the last couple of months faltered. But that's part of the premises right there, that development unfortunately isn't happening, but it would have never had an option if that land was not annexed into the city.
When that was annexed.
That was proposed by a business. No, the city was approached with and asked to annex it by a business.
We were approached by the current landowner to be able to annex his land into the city limits, as he was approached by a housing developer who was interested in purchasing said acreage.
Well, that's already happened on its own without the city pursuing it. And that's not always necessarily beneficial for the city. Annexation is expensive to run city sewer and water out to those places. That may not necessarily be role that's beneficial to the city.
Well, I wonder if there's a way that we can put language in there that might not be a larger part of the focus. Maybe we're putting more weight on infill versus annexation because of the costs. Because we know it takes a long time before we actually get a return on those
On that
investments.
tax base. Yep. So we could add language when appropriate, something along those lines.
Just curious about that particular project. So what costs have the city incurred on a project that's now has fallen through?
On that, mainly just staff time of working to have that property, working with the township and the property owner to have his 6 acres annexed into the city.
Okay.
So am I wrong to say that
The infrastructure is already out there.
the cost for annexation infrastructure, the city doesn't pay for that any longer? They put it on the developers. They used to take it and they used to put it out there and they used to put it on the tax roll and you spread it out and the city would come with the money, but they don't do that anymore. So on an annexation or development, there's only any cost to the city upfront. It's all put on the developer, which I was thinking we should talk about and say, hey, the city should have a piece of that action. They should have a little bit of the skin in the game if we're gonna create, $300,000 more a year tax base. But right now they've changed it, so an annexation doesn't cost the city a great deal. Because of that development, it used to be, where you'd have to cover all the water and sewer and all those lines, but they don't do that no more.
It's about $17,000 an acre.
So they don't do that anymore.
But when it's economically feasible for a developer, they're already gonna purchase it because they know all those costs. And there's only one type of housing that's gonna be built for the most part on an annexation because it is so expensive to do, especially if you're talking about moving back to the valleys and what it takes to run sewer and water at different elevations that, far out of the city. So I don't know, I'm not dead set against it, but does that really be a goal of the city to promote that? If developers are already gonna pursue the city on that when it's economically feasible for them to do that?
Fair point.
But are we at that point? If the wording is in there, we don't have to pursue it, but do we wanna?
Leave the door open.
Yeah, by saying, annex when appropriate. Is that saying it is appropriate if we're addressed by a developer that is willing to foot the bill?
Mhm.
But they're already doing
Not always, because that means you're looking for something to buy,
it.
like I was saying before, the more high-end stuff you got out there, the more it opens up for low-end stuff down here. The more you annex, the more you develop up there, the people that have had their homes and built equity here are gonna move up and move up. And if you don't have those homes to move up to,
Potentially, not everybody wants to live outside of town either.
but as far as sales and so forth, that's how it typically is with the first-time home buyers. Then they go to the middle here, and then a lot of them go to, wee valleys and stuff. There's no more wee valleys being built. There's no more, not big ones like Springbrook, but wee valleys, not valleys and all those. There's nothing like that anymore. How do we get those to build more stock to free up our base in town? Our first-time home buyer stock. That's what I was thinking with annexing. But not encouraging it, just how do we get that moving?
and to all of your points, actually. To make sure that it's economically viable and to make sure that we have the market segment and to make sure that it can actually be achieved. You know, some cities will put in a provision, I'm thinking of Fate, Texas, for example, where subdivisions have to demonstrate that all of the infrastructure that's going into place, their new tax base being created will justify the installation and or maintenance and the replacement costs in 30 years. So that we know that we aren't going to be losing money, for example, on that infrastructure investment. I think that that's a pretty helpful thing to put in there.
So can we talk about the annexation with partnerships, looking at that for private investment versus city payback or something? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, can you clarify
So,
that?
in the comprehensive plan, are we looking, what you're saying the city wants to know if the juice is worth the squeeze. What's their payback? Are they gonna get tax money out of it to put the first proposal up? So maybe we're encouraging outside annexation with profitable development of the city or profitable tax base of the city in the future. I'm not sure what I'm saying, you know. So
Yep,
how
it's
does- is it
fiscally
good for the city?
sustainable
Is it
tax
good for the
base.
city in long term, looking at, and encouraging looking at that development?
Yeah.
Opposed to a development that doesn't have any cash flow, we don't know, or that doesn't look good for the city in the long run.
Right, exactly. And so some cities do write that type of language, to your point about wordsmithing directly into their actual ordinances, so that it has to be demonstrated in order to go forward.
Yeah, because it wouldn't make sense to let someone develop and then the cost is a boatload of money and then the market's not there anymore, which has happened. I've seen it.
So I do want to be cognizant, this is a really good discussion. It is 5:40. I'd like to get our next meeting on the books, and I would keep talking as long as you want. I'm happy to talk for literally my entire life doing my job. So let's take a look for about 2 weeks out and see what times might work for people. I recognize that 2 weeks out might actually be the 5th of July, if I'm correct. Somebody tell me if I'm wrong.
Wednesday the 6th.
Wednesday the 6th. Or do people have long 4th of July plans?
Oh, yep.
Oh, sorry, the 29th is 2 weeks.
I scrolled too fast.
Not
So they
one,
can't think-
that's scrolling.
Leaving it on? You're not fireworks here, we gotta go. someplace, right?
Coming east, I mean, they're all over the
I
place.
know, I know.
So if we add the 29th, am I seeing availability around this time period?
I don't like evenings.
You don't like
This is
evenings?
me missing dinner with my kids.
I have an appointment for that day, and I don't know if I'll be back in time.
Okay. Would
But if I
we,
did morning, it'd have to be like 9 AM.
9 AM would have to be, could we look at the 6th?
I'll be gone. I could zoom in.
You can zoom
I'll be
in,
my
okay.
brain.
Deb, Rachel, the
Okay,
6th,
right.
and you would prefer not the afternoon, Amanda,
But, you know, into the dinner hour.
not into the dinner hour?
Yeah, I'm good.
3:30 is
Until
nice.
Is 3:30 possible for everybody?
On the 6th
Well, it's works
Yeah.
best for you.
at
Sorry.
3:30?
Is that for us? I'm not proposing 4:30 either, but. Four.
Or 4?
I can do it.
Then we have a chance for him to get here.
You'd consider 4? All right, 4 o'clock on the 6th? All right, we'll plan on that.
Got it.
All right, and if there is still really active conversation, please don't let me stop you.
I just had one little thing to throw in there while we're talking about fiscal sustainability. I thought it might be nice to make a nod to environmental sustainability when we're talking about developing the bluffs and advising that bluff developments have the goal of preserving the integrity of the landscape. Because I think, you know, reasonable and appropriate growth is an important objective as long as this continues to be the beautiful community that we all look to look at.
And that's important, but sometimes to me, it's really important, actually. Sometimes we get double-edged sword, because when you do that, you drive property values up, and it drives costs for the state up, and it takes away your affordable housing, and that's a good place too. So how do we make it to the middle? You know, it's like the Winona County has you gotta build out 40 acres, right? So you gotta buy a $500,000 piece of property before you build a house. So how are we growing when you have that kind of real estate, you know, and who are we attracting? And so it's like, how do we do both? How do we preserve our beauty, preserve all that, but yet have development and growth, that's affordable. That's real tough.
With a Nap Valley style development, put a couple fourplexes in there, throw a couple twin homes in there. You can still have spacious lawns around those structures. And you can still have all of those nice trees, but there's just room for ownership opportunities or owner occupied rentals that maybe allow some mixed income use in a attractive, environmentally sustainable kind of
Yeah,
setting.
and those could be potential places for land trusts.
Yeah. Because how great would it be to buy yourself a house and then put mom on the lower unit of the floor?
Find another.
My mom lower bed.
Just lost me.
That's something that has to be worded right different. I mean, that's a great idea to start mixing duplexes and so forth, but I'll give you an example of what happens when you do that. I cut, what is it, Country Meadows out in, where's Country Meadows out there, Minnesota City? The market took a real bad hit. That was all empty, and that was a task in trying to get it back to development. So I started building houses there to try to get it looking some movement. There was some smaller lots out there, and I said, you know, how great would it be if we can get some of these developed into townhomes with the smaller lots and get some really nice people in there, you know, 300,000 townhomes and a couple duplexes. And so I had to go get some zoning changes to the council, which was a good view, it was good view council. And the people showed up like I was trying to, you know, I don't ruin their land or ruin their property values, it's gonna be a rental and this, and it's gonna be terrible. And I mean, the stigmatism, I'm thinking, no, these are gonna be people that are, you know, 60 years old that just want a small space, a small yard, that have 300,000 on property. But the stigmatism of that is something that maybe we need to look at to try to get into the comprehensive plan somehow to break that. Because everybody thinks it's
We
gonna
need to
scare them.
educate the
Right.
general population. I actually
Somehow.
got a call from someone today who I know who felt very comfortable calling me, knowing I was on this committee and on the steering committee, who was expressing these concerns, talking about the 30% rule, we can't have more rental. I mean, it just kind of went on and on, like basically they wanted to say the same. And they live in a historic neighborhood. And I was like, I understand your concerns, but there are ways to be inclusive with housing and increase our choice while still retaining the characteristics of neighborhoods. And I said, and all of that can be written in this plan. But they were very adamant about that population of people. They don't want more of them. You're right.
Yeah,
It was kind of aggressive, like the way they were phrasing it. So I was like, I understand your concern. And
I'll illustrate that with the newspaper article about this last meeting that showed up in the Post. You know, Post County and Frugato, we are, you know, he's the past chair, I'm the chair of the Community Foundation Board, I love the guy.
Yeah.
And he is the most consensus building, celebrating person that
He
I've
was
ever
backed
worked
off
with.
about it.
But he said, yeah, you know, we don't want to go away from single family homes. And he provided some of those same kind of perceptions that it's just, you know, he's an active philanthropist. And still, you know, he doesn't see that an owner occupied duplex or a townhome doesn't destabilize the integrity of the neighborhood. And that's where, you know, I've mentioned this in a couple of conversations, but I think it would be so profoundly advantageous for the city to invest in communications of its priorities, because somebody can grab a narrative and really blast it through the local press and blast it through social media. And next thing you know, it's something that starts out as a really solid vision based on need and with the betterment of the community is blown to bits. And I've lived here 5 years. I've seen it happen repeatedly, and I think it's too bad. So I would just advocate for a way to craft messages that's more comprehensive at the outset, so there's less opportunity for fragmentation and misunderstanding.
Yeah, and overall, so I'm gonna punt that to Luke and transformative projects,
Accessible government.
even better.
Yeah, this was just brought up at the Accessible Government Committee meeting yesterday. The desperate need to be able to communicate well with the general public.
One of those things that I've always said, you know, and maybe not so much our building here, but That's all I really know, but a lot of, back in the past, you come to the city and they're more problem causers than problem solvers. And my approach to things is, are you a problem, and I think we need to somehow get that in the comprehensive plan. How are we gonna help people? How are we gonna help?
Assist.
Assist in understanding what we have in our needs in a good way,
Yeah.
It's something like that, because it's not just housing, it's understanding what we need. And everybody doing the same thing.
That's space for convening and positive discussion before just that moment of reaction.
Right.
And
I
you
think there's gonna be a lot of
just-
problems if the land use and the area starts doing what I think around campus and start opening that up to more development, we're gonna have this. And that housing and that are gonna collide there with a lot of issues. And maybe we need to think about, if we want more density in those areas, get ahead of it and start talking about the positive before it really comes. And I don't know how you do that, and I don't know if this is for that, but if it helps the comprehensive plan.
Oh, yeah,
overall, it helps
communication,
everything.
campaign of some sort about.
What are we really looking at, and how is it gonna affect normal people that live in a nice Victorian that have an established house that they don't want to lose equity in?
Mhm.
How does it affect them? An honest conversation about that.
Well, and one of the things that was brought up in that conversation too was how in their particular neighborhood, some rentals were getting, that were typically student housing, were turning back into some single family housing. And it was like, well, they don't have any space and their thing is like spilling out onto the sidewalk and their kids don't have.
Oh, now I know who you talk to. Interesting. It's small town.
It is a small town. But, and I said, well, I understand the concerns for that, but if we were able to create additional housing that had green space and we had setbacks that were required of like a fourplex or whatever, it was like, then, this might not be as much of an issue.
Well, promote the parks area, what is the parks are for, promote small park area, if we have more density, then open up some park area close by or something like that, and then promote that
Right.
idea.
Or build out the infrastructure of the current park, instead of
Right.
taking it away.
So we've now dwindled down to just 4 of us. So I think I'm gonna call the meeting to an end here. This was phenomenal conversation. I appreciate all of you. And I will see you all on the 6th at 4 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. No